In this video, we will be talking about safety rules of the chemistry lab. When we start a lab, sometimes at the top of the lab, there will be some caution symbols that you should know. The skull and crossbones is pretty self-explanatory. Basically, you don't want to ingest, inhale, or get this product inside your body of any way, shape, or form, or sometimes it's even as clear as skin contact. You don't want this stuff anywhere near you. Make sure that you wash your hands after the lab is over. You should do that anyway. This right here refers to the fact that some chemicals are more flammable, and just a little bit of static electricity can potentially cause a problem. So be very careful with those symbols. Now also we have here a fire extinguisher, which means that there's a possibility that this reaction could produce enough energy to ignite. And we want to make sure that everyone is aware of where the fire extinguisher is in the classroom, and I will show you that in person in class. It's very important when you're in a chemistry lab that you exercise caution and good judgment. You should follow all of the instructions given by your teacher and notify me immediately if there's any accident or unsafe area. And as you can see from the cartoon, let's make the cartoon a little bit bigger. As you can see from the cartoon, Professor Glickman is putting some hydrochloric acid on the back of Professor Bingham's neck. Absolutely never, ever, ever try to put anything on anybody. Not a good thing. When you receive a lab from me, it's important that you read the instructions and understand them perfectly before you start your lab. Always follow the lab procedure exactly and never do any unauthorized experiments, which means don't go and start mixing chemicals just because you want to see what happens. When working in the lab, you should always wear safety goggles. You have to have these safety goggles on your face when you're working with chemicals, flames, or any other heating device such as a hot plate. If you wear contact lenses, you should let me know ahead of time, just so that if there's a possibility something gets in your eye, we can take specific precautions and make sure that the contact does not adhere to your eye. Near the front of the room, there is something called an eye wash station. If in an emergency you get something into your eye, the first thing that you should do is you should walk over and you should put your whole head in the eye wash station, turn the eye wash on, and flush the eyes with water. When working in a lab, it's important that you wear the proper clothing. You should always be wearing closed-toed shoes, especially if we're working with acids or strong bases. You should keep your hair tied back. If you have long hair, that goes for the gentlemen as well. If you have long hair, it needs to be tied back so that nothing catches on fire. If you lean over and it catches in a Bunsen burner, you'll be in bad shape. You don't want to take any chances. Also, you want to make sure that you're not wearing anything with dangly sleeves like this lady is doing right here, because that has a possibility of catching on fire as well. One other thing, if you are wearing bracelets, ladies, the bangle bracelets and the bracelets that are hanging from your wrist, if that gets too close to a flame, the metal from the bracelet can get very hot. So it's important that you take those off if we're working with any flames or anything hot. Anytime you work with chemicals, it's important that you wash your hands if you get anything on them. I would suggest that after every lab that you wash your hands. If you happen to get something on your hands, like an acid or a base or even some particular salts, you want to flush your hands with water for about 15 minutes. If you are just finishing a lab and everything went smoothly, then you can just wash your hands as usual. Handle glassware, sharp tools, and heated containers carefully. I can't stress this enough. Hot glass and cold glass look identical. When you go and heat up a test tube and your partner turns the heat off and you turn around and you think that that heat has been off for 15-20 minutes, but in reality it's only been off for 3 minutes, that glass, that test tube, is still going to be extremely hot. Be very careful. Do not touch any glass unless you're sure that it is cooled off. And don't do what this guy's doing, wearing the test tube behind his ear. He says, they hate it when you carry the test tubes that way. I remember when I started kindergarten, one of the first lessons that we learned was how to carry scissors properly. I just bought brand new scissors. I showed them to you yesterday in class. You always want to be careful with sharp objects. And sharp objects don't include only scissors. They can include X-Acto blades. They can even include sharp glass or razors. So be very careful when you're handling these sharp objects. It takes less than a second to slice your finger open, and it really, really, really will smart. And I don't want anyone having to go get stitches. So be careful with sharp objects. If you happen to be cut with a sharp object, notify me immediately. It has to be reported. It's not an option. I have to fill out a report, an accident report. Broken glass and sharp objects do not go into the trash cans. There'll be a special container for you to place the broken glass and the sharp objects in. So be careful. We don't want any of our custodial staff getting injured when they're throwing the garbage out because a piece of glass cuts them. I have a dustpan and broom, and I will clean up the broken glass. So be very careful. Aha, my favorite thing, electrical safety. One of those other kindergarten rules. Never, ever, ever put anything into an electric plug that is not supposed to be there. Back in my second year of teaching, I was not in Comstock, I was in Belmore Merrick. There was a young man, I don't even remember what his name was, but he placed a Wrigley Spearmint gum wrapper into an electric socket and shocked himself. Yes, gum wrappers are metallic and they do conduct electricity. Please make sure that you keep everything away from the electrical outlets. It's important that we keep our lab clean and neat, and we don't put books and papers and anything else, in this case the stools. We want to make sure that we have a clear exit in case something were to happen, so we want to keep our aisles clear. Your lab stations should be clear except for the equipment that you're using. If you're using an extension cord, make sure it's not dangling over the side of the lab table, and you should push all of the stools out of the way when your bum is not on them. Okay? Carry on. There will be a few labs where you will be working with heating things. When you are working with heating things, it's very, very important that, and we talked about this before, you tie back your hair, any loose clothing, especially if you're working with open flames, or even hot plates, because if you have specific polyesters or rayons, they can catch fire very easily. Never ever look into the container as you're heating it. It can splatter up and get in your face. Although you'll have safety goggles on, it still can burn your skin. Never point the end of a test tube at yourself or at others. When you're heating something in a test tube, the pressure within the test tube can cause the substance that you're heating to come out the open end very quickly, and that's a dangerous situation. And never ever heat anything in a closed container. Basically what you're doing is making a pressure bomb. You don't want to heat anything in a closed container. If the bell should happen to ring while you have something on a hot plate or while you have a Bunsen burner going, it's important, if you have to leave the room, that you turn the hot plate or Bunsen burner off. Here again, we're mentioning the heated metal and glass looks cool even though it is hot. Be very careful when touching anything metal or glass because it looks the same if it's hot or cold. And do not place hot glassware directly on the lab desk or in cold water. The whole beaker or Pyrex flask will shatter. When you're doing a lab, it's important that you read the labels for the chemicals that are required for the lab at least twice, sometimes 3 times. Make sure that you're using the correct chemical in the correct test tube. You cannot substitute chemicals. Each chemical has specific chemical properties, and those chemical properties can cause some very dangerous reactions. So make sure that you only use the chemical that you are supposed to in the lab. Never touch, taste, smell a chemical unless instructed by me. I would suggest that we never touch, taste, or smell a chemical at all, period, end of story. Never mix the chemicals unless I specifically tell you it is okay. Okay, chemical safety. When you are doing a chemical experiment, make sure that you transfer your chemicals carefully from one vessel to the other. Also, make sure that you don't contaminate the chemicals in one container with the chemicals from the other container. If they have lids on them, keep the proper lid on the proper chemical. If they have a spatula to dispense the chemical, do not mix the spatulas up. If you are pouring acids, always pour the acid into the water and not the other way around. If you pour the water into the water will form a barrier and the acid will heat up from the bottom and it will splash up. Consider all chemicals dangerous. Whether you think that they're dangerous or not, all chemicals have the possibility of being dangerous if mixed with the correct or incorrect things. So be careful. Alright, things you should never do. You should never eat or drink in the lab or use lab glassware to eat or drink out of. We're going to stick to never, ever, ever eat in a lab. When you're in the lab, it's important that we are working calmly. We are not playing practical jokes on each other. We're not running around. We're not throwing things. We're not trying to heat the edges of our pen or see if our paper will burn. All of those things can cause bigger problems than you could ever imagine. We've had times where people decided that they were just going to see if a Bic pen cap would burn in a Bunsen burner, and we ended up evacuating the building because the fumes from the Bic pen, the plastic from the Bic pen, set off the smoke alarms. So even if you think it's harmless, you might want to reconsider. The practical jokes are never funny in a chemistry lab. Okay, in the chemistry lab, we have a bunch of lab safety equipment that you should be familiar with. The fire blanket is over here to the right of the office door. When you're using a fire blanket, the person needs to be laying horizontally when you're wrapping them up. The fire blanket will work as a chimney if they're standing straight up and down. So I will demonstrate that in class for you. Also, you should know the location of your fire extinguisher, the shower, which you will use if, God forbid, you get something on you. If you take a shower in the chemistry lab, just be aware that you must take your clothes off. Those clothes, if you spill something on yourself, like an acid or a base, and those clothes are still on you and you're trying to take a shower with the clothes on, the acid is still going to be held up against your skin. So those clothes need to come off. The shower is, well, as you can see, the drain is not so great, but the shower is not a toy. We don't turn it on and off very easily, not to mention it will probably drain into Mr. Caniglione's office, because that's what we're above. So be careful with the shower. Only use it in case of emergencies. Eye wash station is also available for you right next to the fume hood. Take a look at the eye wash station. God forbid you get something in your eye. And then we have a first aid kit, which is fully stocked with Band-Aids. If you get anything worse, where you have anything worse than a paper cut, we must fill out an accident report and you must go to the nurse. So our first aid kit is just for immediate first aid, and then you'll have to go downstairs. If you spill something on yourself, start rinsing immediately and let a partner come get me to get some help. Okay, to summarize, we're going to, when we're doing our labs, we must maintain our work areas. That means they have to be clean and neat. Only things that are supposed to be used in the lab should be on your lab table. Make sure that you're reading and following all directions carefully. Don't come to me and say I don't understand this when you didn't read the directions. Report any spills, accidents, or injuries to me immediately. In other words, don't think that just a little bit of cut on your finger is okay. It has to be addressed. When we're done with the lab, we clean and put away everything into the lab bins the way that we found it, and we dispose of waste products according to instructions. Sometimes things can go down the sink, sometimes things need to go in a disposal. Okay, so I know that I went through these safety procedures very quickly, but I don't want this video lesson to be 20 minutes long. Make sure that you understand the safety features of this classroom, and that you know how to use them properly. So like this says, do it right. The right way is the safe way. And we'll have a good time and a good year. Until next time.